Lovely. Thanks very much, Brian, and thanks for having me, and thanks to Claire for reaching out and inviting me to come and speak as well. That's ace. My name's Paul Jackson. I'm a designer on the voice and AI team at the BBC, and over the past year, the times certainly have been a changing for us. We've faced a challenge of designing a voice experience for a unique audience of the future.
Have you ever had a dream that you want him to do you so much you could do anything?
Yep, that's right. We were asked to design a voice experience for children aged 3 to 6, an audience that's so of the future that they don't even know how to speak yet. So briefs don't really come much tougher than that. And my aim today is to convince you that when you learn how to design a voice experience for children, you're actually learning how to design a voice experience for anyone. So my talk is called Deceptively Simple, and that's because there's a wealth of complex design decisions that have gone into the BBC Kids skill, and they are all hidden behind a really child-friendly exterior. And over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to expose that design thinking. I'll show you that the design principles we learned designing for children are actually universal design principles that you can apply to voice experiences for anyone. So the place to start would be those challenges. You know, why are children so hard to design voice experiences for? Well, there are 3 main challenges. And the first one is that children simply aren't good at speaking. Why is that? Well, children have got, a really limited vocabulary. They simply don't know as many words as we do. They're not as good at pronouncing words as we are, so that's going to make it hard for smart speakers to understand them. And also, they lack the conviction when they're speaking sometimes, and they're not as good at sort of moderating their volume. Sometimes they'll shout, sometimes they'll whisper. So, it's a pretty tough challenge. And what we've seen since we launched the BBC Kids skill a year ago is that 40% of everything that's said to our skill is not understood. We can't tell what they're saying. That's almost half. Imagine having a conversation with somebody and every other thing you say to them they don't understand. That's what it's like for children talking to smart speakers. But actually, when we heard that young man stuttering through the intro there, we knew broadly what he was trying to say. We can work that out, and we can understand 3 to 6-year-olds absolutely fine. So actually, as much as children aren't good at speaking, smart speakers aren't good at listening either, We've all had situations where we've talked to Alexa or Siri or Google Home where we've not been understood. It's just that children are more prone to this happening. So the second challenge is that children are really sensitive. Children respond emotionally, very emotionally. If something doesn't go their way, they can get frustrated far quicker than we would. That can be a problem because frustration soon leads to anger. And what we've seen from usability testing is that children, if they're not understood once, the second time they speak, they'll shout the answer. And that's problematic for 2 reasons. One, they're going to be, they're less in control of their speech and they're more likely to mispronounce. And also smart speakers are less likely to understand them if their voice is distorted. So that's a real problem. And we witnessed one situation in usability testing where a child actually wasn't understood the first time they spoke. The second time, they just changed their answer. That's a really terrible experience to just, that didn't work, I'll try something else. That's not what we aim for. And this means that children can get really angry, and they can even go beyond getting angry, and they can actually get really upset, which is the last thing that the children's team at the BBC want. It's sort of one of our mantras is we never make children cry. So we have to make sure that we don't do that either. Children just jump to emotion far quicker than we would. Small inconsequential things going wrong can lead to them getting angry, frustrated, and upset. Children are basically massive divas that we have to design for. The third challenge is that children have a really short attention span. If you've spent any time with children, you'll know that they struggle to focus on anything for very long, let alone some abstract voice experience that's coming out of a speaker and that's just in the air. You can imagine a child using a smart speaker at home. You're likely to be competing with something on the TV with the volume turned down, we hope. with toys that they're playing with, And seeing as we have nothing physical or nothing visual, it's really hard to keep children focused on a voice experience. And children have a really impulsive nature. They can be 2 minutes into something and decide they want to do something else entirely. That's especially true if you commit the biggest crime of all, and that's being boring. So we try and avoid that as well. Children are even flakier than the flakiest millennial, basically. So how do you solve these problems? Well, we know that children are incapable of speaking well. We know they're oversensitive, and we know they're inattentive. Does that sound familiar? Well, children are like a species made up of our worst users that we could ever imagine, basically. Which sounds awful, but it's a really big opportunity, because as I said at the start, this means if we can get a voice experience right for children, then we're going to get a voice experience right for anyone. Doesn't take a big leap to understand why the BBC's voice strategy started with kids. So how do we solve these problems? Well, I've got 3 points and a couple of design principles that I'm going to tell you about. So the first point is that you should expect things to go wrong and design for that. Now, this very nicely echoes what any parent will know, that things go wrong with kids, and it's certainly true with smart speakers. Misunderstandings are absolutely inevitable. We know that children aren't very good at speaking, and smart speakers aren't very good at listening, and we can't change either one of those things. But what can we do? Well, the first design principle is a good place to start. We say, don't keep children stuck in error loops. Turn a bad situation good by presenting them, by progressing them, even when they're misunderstood. So, how do we employ this in the BBC Kids skill? Well, if a child says something that we don't understand, we give them a second chance to say it again. This is good error handling, this is good UX, this is really nice and sympathetic. But what if a child says it for a second time and we still don't understand them? If we keep them in a loop, and when we do this 3, 4, 5 times, that becomes less sympathetic and more just downright cruel. Nobody likes to be kept stuck in the same place. So we have a rule in the skill where we always offer a second chance to say something, but we never offer a third. Instead, what we do is what any good parent would do, is we distract the child with a surprise. We know that kids love unboxing videos, they love mystery boxes. The allure of the unknown is massive for children. So let me play you a demo of what we do.
Who do you want to play with?
Peppa Pig.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Who would you like to play with?
Peppa Pig.
Oops, I still don't understand. Would you like to meet more friends? Or would you like a surprise?
Surprise.
Here's your surprise.
So what happened there? Well, first of all, Peppa Pig is not BBC, so we don't accept that. So that's why the child wasn't understood. Just get that out the way. What happened there was the child wasn't understood, and then they said it again, and they still weren't understood, so we offered them a surprise. And we found in usability testing, when we did this, every single child, I've never seen a child say no to a surprise. And what we've done there is we've turned a bad situation into a good one, into something quite fun. And the surprise they get is actually just jumping into some content that they could have selected anyway. But we've distracted them from this frustrating situation and moved them on, basically. And that works surprisingly well. But how do we avoid bad situations like this in the first place? Well, second design principle states that ask questions that have distinctive, easy-to-say answers. So, what is a distinctive, easy-to-say answer? Well, ideally, 1 or 2 syllable words would be, perfect. And words that children know. We know they've got small vocabulary, so don't try and get them to say serendipitous or something like that. And in terms of being distinct as possible, you want words that are not going to be confused by a smart speaker. I've got an example. So when we first launched the skill, this is what we asked children. Would you like to play a game or hear a story? Seems quite straightforward, but it wasn't really simple enough. And children kept choosing game, because why would you want to hear anything when you could be playing something? Those 2 verbs are not equally balanced. So what we did is we changed it. and we simplified it down to, would you like a game or a story? Game and story are really short, they're really distinct, and we've taken that verb away so that they're a bit more evenly balanced as well. Another example is in the waffle game. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the dog Waffle. He's very annoying. But in the waffle game that we have on Voice, child has to decide whether Waffle should walk or wait. And they were the two terms that we used because they sound quite catchy and they're short. But when your game mechanic is reliant on whether a dog walks or waits, and those words are so similar sounding, it caused a problem. We found that Waffle was walking when he should have been waiting. Mrs. Hobbs was waking up. It was an absolute nightmare. So we changed that to walk or hide. It was only a small change, but it made all the difference. So in terms of being distinct, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And by sticking to this principle of simple and distinctive, you give your smart speaker and your users a much better chance of understanding one another. And this brings me on to the second point. Don't frustrate children, and if you do, you should take the blame. So I've talked about how sensitive children are and how you shouldn't frustrate them. How do we do that? Well, one of our design principles is never use language or tone to make the child feel as though they're to blame. This is our third design principle, and there's a story behind this. We were doing some usability testing up in Salford in our labs at the BBC, and we get lots of children in to come and test the skill. And some children are shy, some children are really not shy. And this morning we had a really, really shy child, the most shy child I've ever seen come in. And usually we spend 10 to 15 minutes settling them down, asking them questions about the CBeebies characters they like, how they use a smart speaker at home, to get them settled into what's quite an alien environment to them. But this child on this particular morning, we took half an hour just to try and get him to warm up and to talk to us. And after half an hour, sure enough, we managed to get him to start the skill. And he said, "Alexa, open CBeebies." And the skill started. And we asked that question, would you like a game or a story? And he sort of quite meekly said, "Game." And we all heard him in the room, but the smart speaker didn't. And here's what we said to him. This is what the speaker said. "Sorry, I didn't understand what you said." And he welled up and his lips started shaking. And he was really, really crestfallen. We completely smashed his confidence. Everything he'd mustered up just sort of dissolved into nothing. And he didn't say anything after that. We got nothing more out of the session from that. But we look back on that session as probably the most valuable session we ever did, because what we learned that day was that there's 3 words at the end of that sentence that put the blame entirely on him. The "what you said." He took it personally. He felt like he was to blame. That's why it wasn't working. Not to mention the fact that Alexas aren't great at listening. Not to mention the fact that, that potentially we could have been at blame for the options we'd chosen. He took it all on himself. And we learned that day that actually we should take the blame and we should say that we don't understand. Can you say that again? Because otherwise you'll upset users just like that young man. And even though he might have been an extreme case, you could well imagine any child feeling a little bit put down by being told that what you said is wrong. We also follow another principle to avoid frustrating users as well. If you're asking a question, end the sentence with it and listen for an answer immediately. Now, we know children are really impulsive. As soon as they know what they want to say to a smart speaker, they want to say it, and they will say it. And if you don't acknowledge this and you don't design for it, you'll really frustrate them. So I've got an example. This is how we used to navigate children to games. We'd allow them to choose. Who do you want to play with, Andy or Justin? And that's when children would answer the question. And there's 2 problems with this. At that point, children haven't heard all the information, so they might not be equipped with the right options, the right things to say. And secondly, the smart speaker's not even listening to them at this point. The prompt doesn't open until the sentence is finished. So we rearranged the sentence, like so. So we started with the options, this time not phrased as a question, but phrased as a statement, and then we ended with the question. And that's where children answered. It was far, far better. They knew the options, and they knew that the device was listening. And this brings me on to the final point. Don't bore us, get to the chorus. It's a classic line, but it's very true. Now, the BBC Kids skill is quite unique. amongst all the skills that are out there, because instead of us having lots of individual skills for our games, we have one skill that's got 5 games, over 20 stories, and probably over 100 songs now. And that's a ton of content compared to the rest of the skills that are out there. It's not just a sales pitch, do check it out. But the point is that we need to have a layer of navigation. You know, we need to be able to get children to that content, and we need to let children know how much content we've got as well. It causes a really big problem for us. But moving children through this navigation as quickly as possible is really vital. And we do this by sticking to the following principle. When offering a choice, provide no more than 3 options. Now this seems like the simplest, easiest principle of them all, but there's actually a lot to this one. The reason we say no more than 3 on the face of it is that if you offer anybody more than 3 options, they'll struggle to remember them, you know? But the real crux of why this is good came from an experience we had when we were talking to parents. So I want to talk about breakfast time as a parent. Now, I'm not a parent, but this is what came from our research. Now, parents told us that when they're offering their child breakfast in the morning, they would never give them an open question. They'd never ask, what do you want for breakfast? What they would say instead was, would you like cornflakes or would you like Rice Krispies? 2 choices of cereal. Now this is really smart parenting, it's really good UX. Parents are shit hot at this, basically. Because what's happening there is they've balanced the child's desire for a choice, you know, and then wanting to empower their child to make a choice with their mealtime, with the parent's desire to get the child eating something and get on with the morning routine. It's really, really smart. It's been deliberately engineered to get children really quickly into cereal, or in our case, into content. And we saw the value in this, which is UX speak for we ripped it off wholesale, and we put it into the BBC Kids skill. So let me demonstrate how that works.
Alexa, open the BBC. The BBC.
Let's listen and find out who's here to play.
The Goal Jetters. Hi, I'm Andy.
Who do you want to play with?
So let's break down what you just heard. So on the surface, as I said, this seems really straightforward. But if we dig a little bit deeper, step through it, this first line is a call to action. So it's doing 2 things. We're telling children to listen, and we're letting them know what sort of information is about to come. We're preparing them for the options that are about to be heard. Then we offer them 2 options, and these 2 options are randomly selected. So as I said, we have 5 games in the skill, but at any one time we only offer you 2. If we offered you all 5, it would take much longer, it'd be harder to remember, there's more chance children are going to get bored and leave the skill or not pay attention. So we just do 2, and they're randomly chosen so that as you come back and use the skill again, you'll gradually learn about all the content that's in the skill. Because discovery on voice is really difficult. Just reading out a sitemap does not make for a good experience. And finally, we ask them this question, who do you want to play with? We don't say which of these 2 do you want to play with, we say who do you want to play with? It's a secret open question, just like it is when parents ask, do you want Rice Krispies or cornflakes? If a child says Frosties and you've got Frosties in the cupboard, you'll give them that. But you would never say, which cereal do you want? You give them those 2 options. And this is really good because it's balancing discovery, which is showing the content you've got, which we do with the randomization, with navigation, which is the ability to get to anywhere you want. So if a child gets presented the options, Go Jetters and Andy, and they say Hey Dougie, if we've got a Hey Dougie game that they've played before, we'll take them to it, So this balance of discovery, navigation, and speed is really vital to make sure that children get through this navigation into some content, be that a story, a game, or some songs, as quickly as possible. Because nobody comes home from the theme park raving about the queue that they just stood in. They talk about the rides. And the ideal situation for anybody working in UX is that you don't want them to even remember having queued. So we don't want children to remember being in the navigation. We want them to feel as though they went into the skill, played a great game, heard a great story, listened to some great songs, and don't remember the navigation at all. So in conclusion, what I want you to take away from today is that designing voice experiences for children takes a lot of care and attention. And if you apply that same care and attention, you can design voice experiences for anyone of any age. Design for when things go wrong, because they absolutely will, regardless of the age of your audience. Design for ultra-sensitive users. Think about the subtleties. Think a lot about error paths, because that's where everybody ends up in a voice experience. And it's the details that are what make the experience, because there's not a lot of experience when it's just words being read out by a smart speaker. And don't overwhelm users with choice. Don't prompt indecision by reading out a big, long sitemap. Strike the right balance between navigation, the ability to get to anywhere you want, with discovery, showing the content you've got. If you lean too heavily on either one, it'll be an unbalanced experience. Now, I exposed just sort of 4 of our design principles there, but there's 12 of them in total, and you can find them on bbc.co.uk/gel. We teach you how to ask questions, how to listen for answers, how to handle errors, and how to write content. And I use the word teach very loosely because these are just guesses for us. We've been doing this for like a year now, so principles and teach, they're all very grandiose words for what are some of our learning so far. But we give you examples of bad practice, such as telling users to say this or say that, and examples of best practice, such as just asking users a question, which is like a game or a story. Regardless of age, from 3 years old, children are able to answer that question without being told, say this or say that. And I want you to pay such care and attention designing voice experiences, because this young man that we remember from the start is basically what voice devices think we all sound like, you know? So be smart about designing for a smart speaker, because smart speakers are pretty stupid. Thanks very much.
I think it's really great when we hear a talk which is so different from the norm. So many thanks for that. That was fascinating. We have about 5 minutes for questions. Claire, in there.
I want to say who you are and where you're from in a blind date.
Hello, I'm Aaron Boland from the University of Liverpool.
Hi.
Great talk, really enjoyed it, thank you very much. We do hear a lot about voice being the next big thing, but for obvious reasons, I think, and the limitations of the media, it's really difficult for someone like me to imagine it being kind of preeminent. But are there any kind of contexts or niches you think it's really important for people like us to be considering for the future, for the applications of voice?
I think voice search is where voice is going to land first and foremost. Well, from our research, we've seen children that are as young as 3 using voice search to find things on YouTube. You know, when you can't type, when you're basically illiterate at age 3, but you can still talk. Like, voice search is going to be, you know, the next generation that's coming through is going to be really, you know, really familiar with being able to search by voice, and that's where I think it's going to, you know, it's going to be everywhere first. I think in terms of content experiences, like the ones that we do on voice, I think the jury's still out on whether or not, you know, content experience with voice are actually, there's a future for them. But I think task-based things such as search and, anything that's like, anything that's doing a task is, I think, where it's going to hit first and foremost. That's the best bit of futurism I can do, I'm afraid.
That's great, thank you very much.
Hello, Mike McConnell from the University of Aberdeen. I'm back here.
Hello.
I wondered what your background was, how you got into this element of design, and making an assumption that you did come from a UX background, how easy it was to make the transition, and furthermore, now you have made the transition, is there anything you can take back to conventional UX from what you've learned from voice? So that's about 5 questions rolled into.
That's all right. No, that's good. That doesn't involve me having to think about the future, so that's really good. My background, was in UX, but before that, my degree is in English and film, so that's really helped. That wasn't a requirement for the role. I used to work in TV at the BBC, and then a voice team was formed, and I moved across. I found it really useful, though, to have an English background, though, because so much of what we do is using writing to solve problems. You know, making sure that every word in every sentence counts, and it's about being concise and making sure that, as any good writer will tell you, you need to know what you're trying to say before you write a line. And so voice is purely that. Every single word has to do a job, basically. So that's been, I suppose I've been quite lucky in the fact that, that's my background. It's been a good fit for me, I think. There was another part of your question that I had an answer for, and I've forgotten what it was.
It was kind of what you could take back from this type of design into the conventional UX field.
I think voice is about as pure UX as you get, because you're thinking about, you have so little to work with in terms of the experience. I think it's easy to be sidelined by things like visual design when you're working in UX for more traditional mediums, but in voice there's very little beyond what you hear, you know. So in terms of like user flows and thinking about how users get from point A to point B, voice is sort of pure UX, really, I think. So no, I think it's a great place to test out UX fundamentals, voice. I really think so, yeah.
Time for one more question.
Yes, please. I'm going to use the new technology again.
Someone submitted this question on Slido. Is there consideration of children or users who don't have English as their first language? This is from someone from a university with lots of international applicants, and they're worried about the content not being simple enough.
Oh, that's a difficult question. At the moment, the BBC Kids skill and everything that we're working on at the BBC is purely in English at the moment, but obviously with the World Service and the number of languages that the BBC website is translated into, that's definitely something that we're aiming for, but unfortunately I don't have any answers at the moment about how and when that will happen. I think, not without saying something I'm not supposed to say. I can't answer that, I'm afraid. But things are happening. Take that away, yeah.
Hello, Sarah Lever Warwick. I was just wondering how you decided how many children you needed to use a test with?
We didn't set a number. We tested with we did 7 rounds of user testing with about 10 children every time. And we ultimately sort of did one a month. We sort of worked in this sort of month-long sprint way of working. We did sort of 5 months of testing with children where we were testing using sort of Wizard of Oz style prototypes, and then we did 2 months at the end where we were testing the actual device. So those first 5 months were all about testing with, testing our design, and then the final 2 months were really testing the device to make sure that what we'd designed sort of worked. The number was just what we thought was a practical number for us to be able to test in a day, basically. So we sort of tried to get through 10 children in a day, which was quite long days, but I wouldn't say it was arbitrary, but it wasn't sort of predefined either. You know, we didn't say, we have to hit this number. But no, we just made sure that we were doing loads of testing throughout, basically.
So you didn't have an option?
No, because I think I might have an answer for that now if we were, going forward, but at that point it was the first thing we'd done in voice, so we were just really careful to make sure that we were doing loads of testing. As soon as we'd done one round of testing, we had to book more children in, and that took quite a while because trying to find a demographic, which is children in Manchester who have a smart speaker and have seen the research out, leaves you with quite a small demographic. So yeah. Thanks very much.
Okay, well,
thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for your
Cheers.
talk.